Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to let go of someone who already let go of you? Not because they treated you well, not because they truly stayed, but because part of you keeps hoping the pain will eventually make sense. You replay conversations. You overthink small moments. You wonder what you could have done differently. And slowly, your self-worth becomes emotionally tied to someone who already walked away emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we keep holding on to people who let us go? Sometimes it is not really about them anymore. Sometimes it is about rejection, loneliness, abandonment, fear, and the painful need to feel chosen again. And if you have been carrying that emotional weight quietly, this conversation is for you. Because emotional healing does not begin when they come back. It begins when you finally stop abandoning yourself in order to hold on to somebody else. A lot of people stay emotionally attached to those who hurt them because deep down, they are still trying to earn the love, care, or validation they once hoped for. They keep thinking that if they become more understanding, more patient, or more emotionally available, things will finally change. But constantly trying to prove your worth to someone who repeatedly makes you feel unseen slowly damages your self-respect. Emotional endurance is often mistaken for loyalty, even when the connection is becoming emotionally unhealthy. People stop asking whether they feel valued, safe, or emotionally supported. Instead, they become consumed by the fear of being left behind. And over time, their emotional energy becomes focused entirely on holding on, even while their inner peace quietly disappears. One of the hardest parts of emotional healing is accepting that some doors are already emotionally closed, even if your heart still wants them open. People often become trapped inside emotional uncertainty because the mind keeps searching for explanations, hidden meanings, or signs that things might still change. Unclear endings create emotional obsession because the brain struggles more with confusion than direct rejection. You replay conversations repeatedly, hoping to discover something that finally brings peace. But not every person who leaves will offer proper closure or emotional honesty. Some people disconnect quietly while leaving emotional confusion behind them. Healing begins when you stop reopening old emotional wounds, searching for answers that may never come, and start accepting reality with patience, maturity, and self-respect instead. Sometimes people are not only grieving another person, they are grieving the version of themselves that existed inside that connection. Maybe they felt more confident, emotionally understood, hopeful, or important while that person was present in their life. And when the connection changes or disappears, it suddenly feels like part of their identity disappears too. That is why rejection can feel so deeply personal. But another person's inability to appreciate your value does not erase your worth. Emotional healing begins when you stop measuring your importance through somebody else's attention, consistency, or approval. Your peace, dignity, and emotional stability cannot permanently depend on whether another person decides to stay close to you or walk away from your life. A lot of people remain emotionally attached because loneliness feels emotionally heavier than disappointment. Even unhealthy emotional patterns can begin feeling familiar and emotionally safe over time. The human mind often chooses predictable pain instead of uncertain peace because starting over feels frightening. But constantly chasing people who repeatedly drain your energy slowly disconnects you from yourself. Your emotional state becomes dependent on their responses, their effort, and their behavior. You overthink more. Your confidence weakens. Your mental clarity disappears. And eventually, your peace becomes controlled by someone who is no longer emotionally present in a healthy way. Real emotional connection should not require abandoning your own emotional stability, boundaries, self-respect, or inner peace just to maintain closeness with another person. One of the most painful experiences is realizing that someone stayed physically present while emotionally letting you go long before the connection actually ended. You notice the distance slowly growing. Conversations feel colder. Effort becomes inconsistent. Emotional warmth disappears, yet you keep holding on because you remember who they used to be. Many people become attached to memories instead of accepting present reality. They keep hoping things will return to how they once felt. But emotional healing requires honesty, not emotional negotiation with reality. Sometimes people change. Sometimes connections stop being healthy. And forcing yourself to ignore obvious emotional distance only creates deeper emotional exhaustion. Letting go is not always bitterness or anger. Sometimes it is simply choosing truth, emotional clarity, and self-respect over emotional illusion. A lot of people quietly believe closure must come from the other person. They wait for an apology, a final explanation, or some kind of emotional reassurance before allowing themselves to move forward. But depending on somebody else for closure often keeps emotional wounds open longer than necessary. Some people will never fully explain why they hurt you, became distant, or stopped showing up consistently. And waiting endlessly for understanding can quietly delay your healing. Closure sometimes comes from acceptance rather than conversation. Acceptance that the connection became emotionally unhealthy. Acceptance that unequal effort cannot create lasting peace. Emotional healing also requires disciplined habits in daily life, healthier boundaries, calmer routines, emotional distance from constant triggers, and protecting your peace instead of repeatedly reopening emotional pain through attachment and overthinking. One of the clearest signs of emotional healing is when you stop chasing people who already stopped choosing you consistently. Not because you suddenly stopped caring, but because you finally understand that constantly pursuing emotional reassurance destroys your peace over time. You stop begging for clarity from people who repeatedly create confusion. You stop shrinking your standards just to maintain emotional connection. And slowly, your mind begins calming down again. You sleep better. You overthink less. You feel emotionally lighter because your energy is no longer trapped inside emotional pursuit and uncertainty. Self-respect changes the way you experience relationships, friendships, and even daily life. You realize that protecting your peace is not selfish or cold. It is emotional maturity, emotional responsibility, and necessary for long-term inner stability. If you are struggling to let go of someone who emotionally let go of you, do not shame yourself for caring deeply. Human beings naturally become attached to people, memories, routines, and emotional familiarity. Healing is not about pretending you never cared or forcing yourself to become emotionally numb. It is about learning how to care without losing yourself completely in the process. You are allowed to feel sadness, disappointment, loneliness, and grief. But you are also allowed to stop chasing emotional consistency from people who repeatedly failed to provide it. Peace often begins when you stop searching for your worth inside somebody else's attention or approval. The moment you begin choosing yourself with honesty, patience, boundaries, and emotional discipline, your healing quietly starts becoming stronger than your attachment. If you are struggling to let go of someone who already let you go, please remember this. Healing does not mean pretending you never cared. It means caring without destroying yourself in the process. You are allowed to feel hurt. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to miss people. But you are also allowed to stop chasing emotional consistency from people who repeatedly failed to provide it. The goal is not bitterness. The goal is peace. And peace often begins when you stop searching for your value inside somebody else's acceptance. Why do you keep holding on to people who let you go? Maybe because your heart still hopes the story will change. But sometimes the real breakthrough happens when you finally stop waiting for others to choose you and begin choosing yourself with honesty, patience, discipline, and compassion instead. Share your thoughts below. How are you healing today?